This presentation is being recorded for my ASQ. I'd like to welcome everybody in who's joining us after the event virtually. My name is Todd Schefcik. I am a certified quality auditor and a Lean Six Sigma Black Belt senior ASQ member, and I'm here today to speak about RCA as a mindset, looking beyond the tools. How can we take the tools that we've all learned and apply them in a way that really unlocks breakthrough outcomes for our teams and our organizations? So one of the things that I really want to stress as we go into this is not something that is a codified framework or is something that is a set of tools that we're going to use, but this is really I'm here to share with you guys eight principles that I've come to accept through trial and error and plenty of my own failed RCAs to say, what went well, what didn't, and how can we transform this process into something meaningful. So with that, I'd like to, kind of give us a moment to look at this where I'm taking a moment here to introduce myself. So I'm going to move a bit past this slide since I talked about that. And again, reiterate what we're doing today.
Your camera might be over top of something here.
Yeah, I'm seeing that. That's okay. I'll speak to it.
Oh, no worries.
Okay. So again, what I'd like to stress for you guys in terms of what we're doing today, we're focusing on principles of effective RCA application, and we're not really focusing on learning a new tool. I'm not going to sit here and tell you how to do a 5Y or how to apply a fishbone. So these are all things that in our career we've seen, we've used, we've applied, but I do want to set some ground rules for our discussion today as we go in, and that is that this is specifically a discussion. I'm not coming at this as a presentation, so interruptions are welcomed, anecdotes are welcome, challenges are welcome. So as I go through this, if you have your own insights, your own opinions, your own inputs, please contribute. I'd like this to be an open discussion as we go through. So with this slide, I like to kind of open up the discussion here with, sometimes this is how I feel. What you see in the picture.
I had that discussion a couple days ago.
Right, right. When you look at this, and I got the possum here screaming, "Stop retraining, fix the system." That's not a root cause. That's a symptom. And I'm framing it around a couple questions. Do you ever feel like you work to fix a problem and then it crops back up later? Or your efforts to train your organization on RCA tools fall a bit flat, right? So those are the frustrations that I faced when I was first coming into this field, and I was looking at that going, okay, what can I do different? What can I do better? So I want to jump into some of that. But I also want us to take a look at this one, because this slide right here, I think, illustrates to us what I think is fundamentally one of the issues that we face in the industry when it comes to RCA training and representation therein. So this I actually pulled just a couple days ago from Google, and I searched 5Y training examples. And let's take a second, let's walk through this one. So it gives me a definition of the 5 Ys, but the example says, website traffic decrease. That's my problem. So the Ys that we're walking through, the website has decreased. The problem is website traffic has decreased by 40% over the last 3 months. Why? Reduced website traffic. Why? Fewer customers are visiting the site. Why? Competitor's website is more appealing. Why? Competitor's running a promotion. Why? Our company is not running any promotions. So the root cause that they drilled down to in this example is lack of promotional activity is driving customers to competitors.
Someone in the room had an agenda to do promotions,
right? Right. Something about this, it certainly didn't sit right with me when I read this. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, God, that feels shallow. And if this is what we're using as an example of a 5Y in our training materials, how are we expecting our practitioners out to dig in deeper to this issue? When I look at something like this, Do I have any confidence that, like you mentioned, that this didn't have an agenda behind it, that we're trying to drive to a specific cause, or, you know, where did this get down to our management system to really address that something about this isn't going to reoccur? Okay, great. We're not running promotional activity now, but why did we miss that? Right, in the first place? We can keep going. There's an example that I saw too that cropped up time and time again when it came to like a maintenance type of issue with the safety thing. It was a slip, trip, and fall example. Somebody slipped on some water. Why? There was a leaky valve. Why? And it kept drilling down to, well, nobody performed. There was no preventative maintenance on that valve, and it was allowed to run to failure. And they stopped there.
There's no one reported water leaking.
Right.
Some other things,
and
smaller things to look at.
Right, and the thing that I always ask there is, why wasn't there a PM program? How did we miss that? Are there other valves that would have the same failure mode that, you know, escaped having?
Well, again, you're not going to get to the root cause unless you can ask yourself why one more time.
Keep going, exactly. And you know, the thing
if you're doing it right, it should be more than 5.
Yeah, exactly. You know, when I look at that, you know, I'm always telling the people that I'm training on 5 whys that 5 is just, it's a guideline, right? You keep.
If I remember correctly, 5 was the minimum.
A lot of you know, they try to push you to that, right? In terms of minimum, absolutely. But
actually, you said if you're doing it right, you shouldn't have to go past 5.
And
if you're really getting the root cause or drilling down correctly, but if you did really shallow, then you're going to have to go more than 5. And if you're doing it correctly, you know the technique and what they train you on is that you should not have to, that's why they call it a 5 why. The Japanese would tell you, if you go more than 5, then you're doing it wrong.
Yeah. So what I look at here, you know, I ask the question, why does this fall short? You know, it was too shallow. It stops at a symptom. It doesn't address the management system or the management actions that led us here. It oversimplified a complex issue, and there was no bridge to systemic kappa that came off of this. So when I look at that, what I like to tell my practitioners is, you know, that root cause, you should be able to drive, you know, from that specific root cause, some robust corrective and preventative actions that can scale and be applied outside of the scope of this one specific issue that we're dealing with. So again, I really started feeling uncomfortable with this when I'm like, this is the training that we're receiving to say how you run a 5 why, and it doesn't even get it quite right. So I challenge us to have a mindset reframe on this. You know, the tools themselves aren't broken, the training is shallow. And RCA only works in practice when we practice the mindset behind the tools. And what I get at when I say that is, you know, those same type of core principles that we've brought up so far as a room. You know, is this something that addresses a management something at a management system level? Is this something that can be scaled? Is this something that addresses a true root cause and not a symptom? And you know, what I found is, if the mindset is right behind it, the tool is only there to support you in that action. You can do a root cause on the back of a napkin, you know, versus, you know, having rigid tools. It must be a 5 why, it must be a fishbone diagram, it must be a fault tree analysis that we're doing there, versus, no, let's just apply the principles of what we're looking for in root cause, and you know, make sure that we're addressing something at that level. So I'm going to preview the 8 principles that I've come to accept here, and then we'll go into them in detail. And again, I'd like to invite us all into discussion as we get to each one of these. But these are kind of how I guide myself as I approach a root cause analysis. So the first one, do the work before the event. Second one, get the right people in the room. 3, psychological safety is non-negotiable. 4, be unyieldingly curious without blame. 5, focused on systems and influencers. 6, when it is about people, focus on behavior drivers. 7, kappas must look beyond the single event. And 8, design actions with Pokioka thinking.
Question.
Yeah.
In number 5, I get systems, but what are influencers?
So what I'm talking about with influencers would be, think about, outside events that might impact your system. So for example, when we look at a system, it can fall under stress for no reason of the internal operations of the organization. It could be because of the geopolitical environment that we're operating in right now. So that could be an example. Another example could be, management influencers on the people. So we might have policies, we might have procedures, we might have training that says do X, Y, and Z, but if that's not aligned with the message that we're getting from leadership that says go, 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 push, 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 right, then you can have an influencer on that system that has people taking shortcuts when they shouldn't be. So those are things that I look at when I'm talking about influencers.
I think about influencers, but also influences maybe. So
Yeah.
like 2 o'clock this afternoon, I said, I am not driving to Omaha, I'm driving home at night if it's raining.
Right.
And so just the weather.
Yeah.
And my husband said, I'll drive you if you will pay for a hotel night. I'm like, cool. So here we are.
Yeah.
Right? But just even the weather can influence.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there can be influencers that have nothing to do with your system at all and how it was designed.
Yeah.
I can't control whether an employee is going to show up and they just dealt with, a brother that showed up in the middle of the night, and he fielded a family crisis overnight, but still showed up to work the next day.
Mm-hmm.
All right, but so how do we take influence? When we get down then to number 8. And when we think about designing root causes that incorporate poka-yoke, that error proofing in there, how can we design our processes in the system that worker can show up to work that day and still, feel safe in what they're doing? And when I talk about safety, I'm talking about, safety in their role, safety in their ability to execute competently. That's something that, people. That's a big driver for people from a psychological safety standpoint in their work. You talk about, traditional physical safety and how you're interacting with that, and you talk about the safety of your enterprise, right? So when we look at that, like I said, I'm going to get into each one of these 8 in some more detail as we go through it. But these are the principles that I've come to accept when I go in to lead an RCA and when I'm training other people. So the first one I want to talk about here is, do the work before the event. Number 1. So your root cause analysis oftentimes is only going to be as good as the investigation that you put in before you bring people into that room. But one thing that that gets to the first point here is don't show up to that RCA empty-handed. That being said, I've also seen a number of times where that can paralyze teams. They try that can paralyze teams. That idea of trying to have a perfect investigation before you get in the room to do the root cause investigation. How much is enough information before we can pull the trigger and go into that RCA?
So how do you do it? Because a lot of times you might have the initial action, what do they used to call that? But you're gonna take action to eliminate, not eliminate, but to make sure you contain the issue or whatever.
Containment, mitigation.
Yeah. So is that what you're talking about?
So
time,
yeah.
You
So
need something more than that.
So what I talk about here when I say, don't show up in, empty-handed, we're getting into bullet 2 here, which is lock in what you can't get back. So what I tell people is, those things that are time sensitive, where the information will decay if you wait. So things like witness testimony, right? That operator testimony at the level of, what happened on that day, photographs of the scene, right? Any of the, data that you have to capture in real time that's not retained in some sort of system, right? But other data points that you can collect after the fact, like if you have, a distributed control system that's keeping logs of everything, right? There's nothing that's saying, I need to go prioritize pulling those logs and start analyzing them if I've got photographs to go take, right? And, you know, that gets into bullet 3 here, where I stress RCA is iterative. It's not one way. So that helps with the, you know, the paralysis that can come up by saying, I need to get the investigation perfect before I go into that RCA. There's been in plenty of times where we've gotten in an RCA and that discussion leads us to something where, you know, during the investigation, we didn't really consider or think about that. But as we started brainstorming and talking through it and using the tools appropriately, that question came up. And we said, okay, well, we're going to pause and we're going to go get that information and then we're going to come back. Right? I've seen RCAs fail a number of times because we think that RCA, the actual get the people in the room and work through and find that root cause, is a one-time event. And you have to get in, you have to get an answer, and you have to get out. But if you find that there's, you know, questions left unanswered, and you know it's worth going out and collecting the data and analyzing it, do that, and then come back and say, what did that tell us? And are we able to eliminate some things? Because the data that now show that is not a contributing factor, or is that confirm a suspicion and we should drill down further into that? So an example that I can use with that, without getting into any specifics, related to a product quality issue that we're experiencing out in the field. And it was for a product that was old. It's never experienced this before, and it's been on the market for decades. So it's like, what changed, right? And so we initially did some digging, and we had some thoughts, and we got into it when the tool that we used to for the framework was the fishbone. And as we were getting into that, we said, okay, let's go validate these assumptions. Let's go collect the data and validate what we're seeing here. And the data came back and said, you know what? No, nothing about this changed. You know, we had a change in suppliers. So we were thinking, okay, well, was there something with supplier quality, right? And then we go in and we pulled all of the analysis records for incoming raw materials. We looked at all the COAs. There was no deviation in it from what we were getting from our previous suppliers. And it ultimately led us down to something we never considered to begin with. And it was that our formulation design was incorrect to begin with. And how in the world is that something that only pops up now when it's been on the market for 20 plus years? Mm-hmm. And it's because we were facing some unique conditions where essentially we had a confluence of different errors that showed our lower spec limit had no safety buffer in it. So the second you deviated below that lower spec limit, you had serious product quality issues. And that didn't reveal itself because in our historical production, we never skirted the bottom line of that lower production, of that lower limit.
Spec or just an operating spec?
It was our operating spec, right? But the operating spec turned out to be aligned with the actual, you know, performance spec with no safety buffer in there. So the second you deviated below that, huge problems. So that was something where, you know, we wouldn't have even dreamed considering that when we first pulled the RCA together, the RCA team together, because this product's been on the market for over 20 years. We've never seen it before. So what in that would tell us it was our design. And it was really through that process of elimination where we're like, okay, well, you know, we've exhausted all of our other variables. Let's look at product design and get in there. And we were able to trace it out that way. So
you probably wouldn't have got through it with 5 Ys, but the fishbone might have drawn that out.
Yeah, so the fishbone was helpful. You know, if we do dig the conversation a little bit into tools, you know, what I found is don't rely on any one specific tool. You know, it needs to be contextual to the problem that you're facing. I personally find fishbones very valuable when there's a lot of unknowns in there because it forces you to brainstorm, right? And using that, and I usually use that as an input into a 5Y once we've drilled down to something that looks like a reasonable causal factor. All right. So second principle that I want to talk about here is get the right people in the room. So, you know, some quick tips on this one: avoid leader only or single shift groups. So a lot of times I've seen RCAs run where we bring in all the managers, you know, and oh, I know the process best, and well, you know, bring in your frontline employees as well, because the truth is they know the process best. They're the ones who are living it day in and day out. Don't pair an employee under review with their direct manager. That's something that I've seen, you know, can really threaten the psychological safety. Get that operator clam up real quick if they're sitting in that room with their direct supervisor.
What do you mean don't pair employee?
So if there's an employee that's involved in an event, so if there's, you know, we have a quality excursion that's happened, you know, we've fallen out of parameter, it's caused rework, scrap, and or something like that, and we're doing an RCA on it. We might bring in the actual operator that was working on that shift, right, to get their input on that. I'm not going to bring their manager into that same meeting,
Okay.
right? Because the second my manager's in the room and I'm under the spotlight, I'm not saying anything. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying anything. That's not a safe environment for me. Right. And then another thing that I like to say here is include upstream and downstream voices. This is something that I see gets missed a lot. You work a lot within, you know, the immediate impact, but you have to look at, again, that idea of influencers. The material that you're receiving from upstream is going to influence your process, and you know, the impact of the event is going to impact downstream. So to make sure that your corrective actions are well thought through, you know, you want to include look at it as an end-to-end process and not just, you know, the one specific process that's in question. I challenge you to include your whole value stream in that RCA. Any builds or questions on that one? All right. So principle 3, psychological safety is non-negotiable. When we're involved in an RCA, people are involved, and you're never going to get the full truth out of people if they don't feel safe. One of the things that I always stress at the start of an RCA is we're here to be hard on systems, not hard on people. Right? We want to understand how the system failed you, not how you failed the system. You know, language like that. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, if we focus on people and not process and management systems, you know, we're betraying that psychological safety. People aren't going to openly contribute into that root cause. We're not going to be able to truly drill down and understand what exactly is the driving force behind this. So take, for example, the employee that took a shortcut because you had you had demands from management from, you know, maybe they had to meet some specific quota, right, within that production shift. So they're taking shortcuts to be able to reach that. Are they gonna speak to that if they don't feel safe in that room? And can we address that then? And one of the things that I always stress, you know, with people, especially when I'm coaching managers on RCA and people leaders, is if we're hard on people and less so hard on process, then all right, great. We addressed the issue, whatever it might be with Joe employee today, but there's absolutely nothing that is going to come out of this from a corrective and preventative action standpoint that's going to prevent Jane employee from making that same mistake tomorrow. And now our employees are at risk, and we owe them more than that. And our business is at risk because we haven't ultimately solved the problem. So one of the things that, you know, I like to stress as well is, you know, in general, most employees come to work to do their best, right? So go in with that assumption, give people that grace, and try to look for where the system failed them versus where they failed the system. Now, I do recognize, and most places that, you know, most groups that teach RCA will recognize this as well, sabotage and gross incompetence exist, right? And they are something that you can drill down to in an RCA. Never start with that assumption, right? That should be a diagnosis of last resort. I've exhausted my other options in there. They're not your default. Because again, you know, we have to approach this with the assumption that people are coming to work to do their best. And yeah.
Form that I use that I got from Case New Holland,
okay,
called RCA, Human Error Root Cause Analysis.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful document. It's basically just 20 questions, but it always leads back to what in the process, standard operating procedures, all of that.
Right.
So,
right, and you look for things where when there are human elements, and we'll get to this in one of the principles. You know, the human elements is one of my principles, but you know, there's going to be lapses, there's going to be circumventions, there's going to be, you know, violations that might occur in a process, but ultimately you can't stop there at the RCA to say, you know, the corrective, the SOP wasn't followed, because again, from a 5Y standpoint, why wasn't it followed?
Right.
Right.
Don't they use the RCA? They use that primarily for their safety systems, right? Or do they use it for quality?
I use it for product.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, because I know that I used to audit those guys, but it's been a long time ago. So.
Yeah, we use something very similar within our, you know,
right.
health and safety
That's
sphere.
what I'm saying. RCA, it sounds like that started out at least. As
yeah.
The health and safety side.
You know, our health and safety group at my organization is very big on human factors when we look at that. And trying to say, okay, when we're talking about human factors, it's not Joe employee screwed up, but it's what about the system, you know, contributed to that from a human factor standpoint.
Basically, 19 of the 20 questions are directly related to the system, the processes, procedures, all that.
Exactly, and that speaks to speaks to that second bullet here, where most employees come to work to do their best.
Exactly.
Right. So then kind of moving forward here, principle 4 here, be unyieldingly curious without blame. So the red flag here is certainty, walking into the room. So one of the ways that I've seen this crop up from an RCA facilitator standpoint is they can become biased depending on how involved in the investigation side of it they are. And I think back to early in my career, there was a pretty heavy expectation that the RCA facilitator was also the lead investigator. And when I was doing that, that presented a particular challenge for me because I was so in the weeds of the investigation that I went into the RCA going, I already know the answer. Why are we here? This is just an exercise, right? And well, there went my curiosity because, wow, I already have the answer. I just gotta drive these groups of people to the same conclusions that I've already done, and I can go boom, boom, done with this. And you know, it was brought up in this room when we saw that example from Google, from the Google search on, you know, the 5Y, that seems like somebody had an agenda here.
Or a bias.
Or a bias, right? And that speaks to me too, you know, with this slide as well. So when we talk about tools, and you know, for those of us watching online and those of us in the room, I'll upload a clean copy of this slide deck as well. That doesn't have my face interposed over some of the words, so you can see it. But that at the core of what I'm saying here is when we look at it from a tool standpoint, you know, consider what the tools are good at. You know, I think about tools like Fishbone to force breadth in my thought because it's a good brainstorming tool, and I use 5Ys to force depth in my analysis to keep driving down. You know, you can use that depth in the same way with that depth and breadth in the same way if you're doing like a fault tree analysis, right? So the key here is whatever tools you're using, make sure something addresses breadth, make sure something addresses depth, so that way you're able to, you know, really look at something that might be multimodal in its impact. You know, very often we have issues and there isn't one clean root cause for it. There's several contributing, right, root causes that led to that. And if you don't have the breadth, you're going to miss that.
Yeah, some people, I know there's an organization that's very large that I used to deal with. They actually had they called it a three-legged 5Y.
Yeah.
They did it for like detection and prevention and some other word, I forget what it is, but that's how they got their breath, by doing it that way. But definitely fishbone would work too, obviously.
Yeah. Like I've adapted the 5Y tool myself to the point where it almost looks like a fault tree analysis. And I just call it my branched 5Y. You know, because you're looking at it and you're going, and you ask that why, and you go, well, there's more than one reason. There's more than one why. All right, great. Let's split it into 2, 3, 4, 5 branches if we have to, and drill them down.
I think the Titanic has about 70-some.
Exactly. Right.
When we really take that whole issue, that whole problem out, problems out.
Exactly. You know, so, you know, if you're not addressing both the breadth and the depth, and you don't have the curiosity to drive into that, you're not going to get to the solutions that are really going to prevent the next Titanic from sinking in that example. And the other thing that I like, that I've found has been very valuable, you know, if I swing back up to that second bullet that says the facilitator must avoid bias from their own investigation, is in my own practice, I've, you know, really pushed back on management and said, you know, if we're going to do this effectively, you need to get me a lead investigator. I can't fill that role. You know, I will be your RCA lead. You know, I will drive that conversation. I will be the expert of for the tools. I will be the catalyst in the room and the facilitator and whatever I need to be in that perspective. But don't make me the lead investigator, right? I find that's a very similar potential mental conflict of interest as going and auditing your own function as an auditor. So, you know, that's one of the things that I do to you know, put a firm line in the sand to say, if we want a good outcome in there, don't put me in that role. If you want me in this role, because I'm human just like anybody else, right? All right. So the fifth principle here is focus on systems and influencers. You know, so don't stop at people, broaden the lens. We talked about that. Look at processes, environment, organizational pressures, external factors. So this goes back to that question about what did I mean about influencers, right? So that's going to be those, you know, environment, organizational pressures, external factors. So environment, that was that example of, hey, I might not show up tonight because it's raining, right? When we talk about organizational pressures, right? That could be that go, 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 go. We have to, we're behind tact, and we have to meet demand. And, you know, you've got people that are working 6/12s and they make an error at hour 70 of their work week. I wonder why, right? You had an organizational pressure there. And then external factors, you know, that's why I was talking about things like geopolitical tensions would be a good example of that. Ports shut down because and, you know, your supply chain network has been disrupted because of that. I think back a couple of years, remember when we had that ship jackknifed in the Suez Canal and completely shut down the Suez Canal for an uncomfortably long period of time, right? There were a lot of businesses that were heavily impacted by that because all of a sudden their supply chain network was thrown into chaos, right? And when you look at that from a root cause standpoint, can I just stop there?
Okay, depends what you're talking about, but yes, you could.
You could, right? And I would challenge people to say, you know,
like a ship was too big to be or something?
There was something caused it to list to one side, and then it got jammed.
Yeah, but from your perspective,
yeah,
there's not much you can do about that because that's not in your control.
Right, it's completely.
It's like when I was auditing full time.
Yep.
It got to the point where, like during the pandemic, like in 2020, people were doing all kinds of corrective actions for their suppliers that weren't giving them the product, and it was always the same. The pandemic and everything's closed, and we don't our supply chain. They got to the point where I was talking to them. I was looking and they still have terrible deliveries and stuff, and like we're not even doing any corrective action anymore because basically it's all the same issue.
Right.
It's force majeure. And they just got, the purchasing procurement people just said that there's no reason to do that because it's all about the supply chain issue stemmed from the pandemic.
There should be crisis management protocols.
Yeah. So what you
No backup suppliers.
exactly. So what you can look at there is, from an influencer standpoint, there's nothing that I could do to stop the pandemic. There's nothing that I could do as an organization to stop the ship from jackknifing in the Suez Canal. But what I can do is I can diversify my supply chain network. What I can do is have emergency procedures in place that I can pull the trigger when something like this happens again.
Yeah, depending on your industry, a lot of that's required, depending on the standard that you're working under, et cetera. That should already be in place. But
tariffs have the same impact.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Right.
Plus the go no go
right.
tariffs.
You got to be flexible enough to be able to
the kind of
that if it's not there, right?
The kind of disruption that can cause. And what I would challenge leaders in an organization after that to say is, all right, our corrective action is now to ensure that we diversify that supply chain and that we look at what the emergency procedures are going to be. But I'm also going to challenge you: where did management fail to not foresee this, right? And not have this not do this
contingency plan.
Right, not to do this why didn't you do this proactively versus us doing it now reactively?
Of your top supply, and if something's your bottom 20%, you're not going to worry about it. But if something's 50% of your business, there should have like 2, 3, or 4 backup.
Exactly. And if we find that that's missing when we go through the RCA, I'm going to challenge them to say, why is that missing?
Yeah, and sometimes though it's unavoidable.
Right, and
if you have like one supplier is in Asia, and the only one that they have a patent.
Right, and they're the only supplier.
There's nothing you can do about it, but usually there's some kind of contingency you can put in place.
Exactly, and I fully recognize that can be true even in my own industry, because when we look at product registrations, when we're trying to sell them in specific countries, those registrations will say that you can only use material from this specific source, right? Even if I can go buy it down the street and it's the same product, it's the same raw material, if I didn't source it from what was in my registration, I'm out of compliance, right? So then I would say, okay, what is it that we can improve about our registration process to give us more flexibility in that, right? So again, we're looking at systems as our source of solution. So, keep asking what outside this person or this moment shaped the outcome. So I always tell people, like in the 5 why example, keep drilling down until there's no more whys to ask, or it's complete. The next why is completely out of you and the organization's control. And that's when you've drilled down far enough and you can start thinking about corrective actions. And the corrective actions that you come up with will vary depending on if it's, a causal factor that's completely within your control or one that's without your control. And we just talked pretty heavily about those ones where it's outside your control, but you still have to have plans in place in case that happens. So principle 6, when it's about people, focus on behavior drivers. So we were talking about this a bit earlier too. Human error is a symptom, it's not a cause. So types can be slips, mistakes, violations, etc. So when I look at that, a slip is something that, is going to be, the operator knows the procedure, right? The operator's trained on the procedure. After the fact, the operator can go, I knew what I was supposed to do there. But for whatever reason, it didn't happen. And you need to drill in and say why. Maybe it's that example that I brought up where we're doing 6/12s a week and it happened on my 70th hour of this work week. I was tired, right? You pushed me to the point where I just had a lapse. I knew I was supposed to do that, but in the moment, it didn't happen. We're human. Mistakes, that's gonna be prone for anybody. We need to design systems to, be mistake proof. Violations, those can happen as well. But again, a lot of time those violations aren't because people want to show up and, sabotage the system. They found that the system is set up against them, right? And doing it right is the hard way, And we want to design systems where doing it right is the easy and the natural way to do it.
I think on that point, for companies that are certified ISO 9001, it's actually a requirement under operational control that says organization will put controls in place to prevent human error.
Right.
So if human error comes as a cause in cause analysis, I write that as a nonconformity to the corrective action and to the operational control, because something allowed someone to fail. Something in our system allowed someone to fail.
Right.
So
Right.
Right. That's a good point to bring up.
And for me, because I also do the ISO audits as well in my career, and when I look at that, I'm looking at the organization. I'm saying, okay, we landed here, but what are you doing about it, right? Because a lot of this is we don't know what we don't know, and maybe you didn't realize you needed a control here until it happened. But did you stop here and say there was no control, or did you learn from it and redesign your system, right? And that to me has been something that's been very valuable from a management standpoint. I'm blessed to work with a series of managers that find value in RCA and find value in audit, and actually are very grateful when internal and external auditors come in, because they look at anything that comes out of that, whether it's a OFI or a finding, major or minor, it's an opportunity for improvement. It's another set of eyes on our system that saw something that we didn't, and now we can take action on it. Principle 7, CAPA must look beyond the singular event. So the red flag that I see here is we only fix this one incident. So that example that I brought up at the beginning from the training material that I saw with the slip, trip, fall situation with a leaky valve. All right, we get that one valve on a PM and we get it fixed, but at no point did that 5Y or the corrective actions that came out of it address other valves that might have the same point of failure.
Systemic correction.
Exactly. So we really need to make sure that we're looking at it not from a single point intervention, but from a systemic intervention. And I've seen this done well. I've seen this done poorly. And when it's done poorly, that's when we get back to that screaming opossum at the beginning of my slide deck where we're saying, weren't we just in here solving this, right? And yeah, maybe we were just in here solving it, but you solved it for one production line and not the other three in your facility. You didn't expand that out to say, well, you know what? Those three other production lines have the same potential failure mode, and let's address that before they fail. And again, the key to that is looking at RCAs and audits for that matter as that blessing, that opportunity that it's presented itself as a something to learn from. We're going to take from that and apply it to the system as a whole. So here, this is another thing where I can look back to that slide where I was talking about having the right people in the room. And one of the things that I said that was on that slide was include people from other shifts. And this is something that I think is really important to link back to this principle as well, because you want to make sure that you're checking other sites, other systems, other shifts, other lines, right? Because if something is happening on, let's just say third shift, for example, are we drilling down to figure out if it's something specific with that team? Is it something specific with the process as a whole? Is first shift just as likely to make the same error? They just haven't yet, right? And if we're not asking those questions, we're not really protecting the business. So, here, a narrow CAPA is an event control. It's not prevention, right? The best that we're doing is addressing that immediate concern. We're fixing that one valve that gentleman slipped on, but we're doing nothing to prevent it.
I think actually in the Toyota production system, it was like go and see.
Yeah.
Where we had a facility. This corporation had 12 plants in North America, between Canada, U.S., and Mexico. And when they had a non-conformance, they actually did that. They actually then took it and put it through not all the plants. If it was like on their pre-tensioners for their seatbelts, they would go to the other seatbelt plants to modulate.
Right.
If it was something to do with the airbags, they would go to the airbag plants. But yeah, they always did it across all their plants.
Right.
Not even just the lines.
you know, when we think back to where I was talking about RCAs being iterative, where you can stop, go gather more information, and then come back. You don't have to do it all in one go. I've actually stopped an RCA in the middle of the discussion, had the people on the team suit up, and we went and walked the line. We're going to go see it with our own eyes. And we're not gonna stop at the one line, this one production unit that, you know, had the issue. We're going to keep walking the plant. We're going to look at the other productions lines too. And while this is fresh in our minds, we're going to look to see is this same setup present elsewhere. So that way we know just how broad we need to get with it. And, you know, that wasn't anything anybody in that room was expecting, right? To be like, oh crap, I got to go get my PPE. I'm like, yeah, go get it. We're walking. But, you know, grumble as they did it. By the time we got back, right, and we saw what we needed to see, everybody was like, you know what, that was actually really valuable. I'm glad we did that.
Because how do you know don't go out to Gemba?
Right. You know, it goes back to that principle. We, you know, as quality professionals, we look at the go and see the Gemba as foundational, right? Now, something that comes to mind for that for me too is, you know, that go and see that Gemba works really well in our traditional physical spaces, but as we're transitioning more and more to digital environments, that go and see in that Gemba becomes challenging, because how do I go and see into the middle of like an SAP system, right? And what's happening in automations behind the scenes or in automated processes. So a little nugget that I can drop for you guys is recently we've seen a lot of success using tools that focus on process mining. And what that is it uses logic and, you know, AI tools to get in there and look at event logs that might be present in your digital systems. It's digital process mining. Digital process mining. Yep. So a company that you guys can look at if you're interested in it is named Celonis, CELONIS. So they're pretty pioneering in that digital process mining, but we're really looking at it as a virtual Gemba, right? Because I can't go walk inside SAP and see what's happening there, or in Salesforce, or in a laboratory information management system, right? But it can with the event logs, and it can actually give you tools that look very similar to what we're used to with a process map or a spaghetti diagram, and really help you visualize what's happening with the automations behind the scenes here. Why am I only getting, you know, an automation rate of 50% when I'm expecting an automation rate of 80% or higher? Right? Maybe that's your challenge statement. It can really help you with that go and see on that one, in order to you know, inform you in that RCA or inform you in a process improvement. Yep. All right. So my last principle here, design actions with Poka-yoke thinking. So this one here is that idea that we're all familiar with of mistake proofing. And the red flag that I see here is a corrective action that just says training operator, right? I can't tell you how many times when I was sitting in the quality lead site where I'd have a supplier nonconformance and I got their CAPA report back and they said, well, we retrained the operator. I look at that and I'm going to reject that, right? Give me something better, right? What are you doing from a systems standpoint to help make that mistake, you know, help make it so that mistake cannot be made?
Why in the system was the training ineffective to begin with?
Exactly, right? Or is there a way that you can redesign the system that mistake can't even be made, training or not?
In my registrar I worked for 16 years, that became the mantra. We never accepted, you know, retrain the operator and any of our third-party audit corrective actions.
Right.
We never accepted that. They got to the point where, you know, no matter who did it, they would always send it back, reject it out of hand.
Right. You know, when I'm in that seat, there's no way I'm going to hit accept on that from a corrective action standpoint, because again, you've done nothing to change your system, and either it's something failed in the training, right? And so what is it about your training program that needs to be fixed? Or it's something that, irrespective of the training, right, the operator cannot execute it consistently. So
it might be something you could do after the root cause analysis as part of a corrective action, but not the root cause is trained, is
exactly
not trained.
Right. So we got to dig in deeper than that, right? So I'm going to stress here, training is your weakest countermeasure. When we look at levels in there, I've seen a lot of systems that might go from like a level 0 to a level 5 or 6. It's very flexible when you're looking at that for levels of intervention, but the scale goes essentially from training to elimination, right, wherever that lands. And you're looking at administrative controls that we can do in there. So a good example that I can talk us through in this goes to driver safety, because we all interact with our cars every day, right? Our level 0 is driver's ed, right? That's just your training, right? Your top level is don't drive at all, take the train if that's available, right? It's going to be the safest way to interact with the cars. You can never get in it. Right, but then you have steps up from there, right? You can have passive alerts or passive notifications, the sign on the back of your visor that says don't put your child under a certain weight in the front seat because the airbag can injure or kill him. But there's nothing that's preventing you from doing that. It's a passive indicator. You can have an alarm that goes off. That's a step higher, right? So when your car starts beeping at you because you didn't buckle your seatbelt, or you're deviating from your lane, right? You can have something that's more active where, all right, it's not just telling me that I'm drifting from my lane, but it's actually taking control of the steering a little bit and putting me back in my lane, right? You can go so far as fully automated vehicles, which is, something that we're experimenting with right now, to some success, to some unsuccess, right? But then again, your top level is just elimination. Don't get in the car, get on the train. All right. So, that gets to the end of the 8 principles that I wanted to talk with you guys here tonight. Again, focusing on what it is that we can approach from a thought process when we go into our RCAs, to make sure that we're approaching it in a way where the tools are supporting us, not necessarily driving us. So that way we can get to an outcome that actually has measurable and lasting impact on your organization. I'd also like to leave you guys with a thought here, and that, becoming well-versed in, RCAs and being able to drive these effective outcomes in here is very good for your careers as well. That mindset helps build influencing. Practicing neutrality and curiosity makes you a valuable asset cross-functionally. Leaders remember you when you're the person that can come in and help solve a complex problem and build those gaps. Quality trained facilitators in RCAs can support operation, finance, HSES, right? And provide that neutral view on a situation. And when your name comes to mind when leaders are thinking about, who can solve a problem and get things done, that's only positive for your career. So it builds that credibility and visibility, and helps for career growth for anybody who's, looking to continue growing their career within quality, or looking to step outside of quality into some of the adjacent realms. Like, maybe I do want to explore options or opportunities available to me in health and safety. So, challenge for you guys as we exit here, the next time when you're in an RCA, ask yourself, are we using tools, or are we just using tools, or are we practicing the mindset? And with that, it gets to the end here. We've got time for, additional questions or discussions as they might come up, thoughts. I would, always appreciate feedback on, what you guys found valuable out of this presentation. If there was anything that you found was, you didn't need that, I'm welcome to that now or after the fact, because it only helps me build in how I present this. I will say that input is particularly valuable for me too, because right now, just on a personal plug, I am working on a project with our global team about how we reinvent our relationship with RCA from an organization as a whole, right? So welcoming in that outside-in view can only help in that. So I do welcome that, and I'm always here for you guys as well to offer that same service back, to be an outside-in view for you guys within your own organization. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me on my ASQ, to network or if you have any questions or builds there. But I'd like to give the floor to you guys right now if there's anything that you've got or any questions, builds, or thoughts.
I loved your 8 points. It was good thoughts, good ideas with that. I want to go back to the very beginning with the AI about the cause analysis, because initially one of my very first thoughts was, so what? No one's hitting our website. I don't ever know if that's a problem.
Right.
And I think sometimes it's like I was saying about a lot of times we spend $100 on a 10-cent problem.
Right.
We're doing the whole cause analysis when so what? No one's on our website. Are we doing what we want to be doing? Are we, making the profits we want to make, whatever else?
Right.
With that. So that was just initially, that was my first thought when I saw that, was I wouldn't have gone further unless I knew why that was in the problem.
Right. That's a good point to bring up there too. Where I like that, throwing $100 at a penny's problem.
Well, we used to do that with, like when Six Sigma first came out.
Yeah.
Back in there, 20 years ago, guys would there was one company that I knew that that's all they did was Six Sigma. They did Lean, Six Sigma, and whatever. And we started, as a registrar, we started asking them questions like, okay, how much are you spending when you have 6 professional engineers on this one thing, and you show me that you made $10,000, and
right.
you spent like $240,000 to get to that $10,000.
Right. You have to have that discussion of ROI on there.
Yep.
Because at the end of the day, ROI can come back in hard dollars, right? I'm getting $10,000 back in savings, but if they then could come back and say, but I'm also getting a $250,000 in risk avoidance,
exactly.
Then I'm like, okay, now we're talking, right? Yep. There's something there.
Okay, it's 8 o'clock.
Yep.
So if you have any other questions, you can always get with us through the ASQ. Same thing for people online. You get in through my ASQ, and we might actually. I have ideas that we might continue the conversation in my ASQ under the discussion threads.
Absolutely. So in case the microphone didn't pick that up, it was announced that we're at time for today's presentation. So we're going to go ahead and close out with the presentation here. And we do encourage anybody who is viewing this online through my ASQ to, bring your questions forward. We will be posting some discussion boards off of this that you can contribute to, and look forward to interacting with the community more on this topic. So thank you, everyone.
Right.